I'm Kirsta Nimi Benedetti, and I have the portrait installations. And so my work is merging storytelling with portraiture.
Hi, I'm Dr. Acuff, Dr. Joni Acuff, and I am a professor and a chair of the Department of Arts Administration, Education, and Policy at OSU. I'm so happy to be here. It's not often I get to engage with art making and artists and to kind of conceptualize it and talk to the artists. And so I'm kind of an artist myself, although I don't, exhibit it, but I can definitely appreciate the process. And I'm really happy to be here to talk to you all through what was going on. I have taken great care to look at all of you all's work, and I really want to be thoughtful about what I offer and how I kind of guide the conversation to be reflective of the themes that I see coming out in your work. So I want to start out. I'm going to read a little bit, but I wanted to start out the conversation is in this vulnerable way and talk about how I entered the work. Hopefully this sets the stage for a vulnerable conversation. Blitz, you said you ready to, what'd you say? Are you ready to interrogate? I'm like, this is a conversation. It's not an interrogation. Come on now. So are we artists in here? We aren't like lawyers. So I wanted to share that as an audience member, I did come in with a both and experience. And in that I felt both joy and grief. And I'll say that I experienced joy because the women exhibited in this show, I can see myself, our shared experiences, the lived experiences, just based on our positions in the world, and the solidarity brings me joy, as well as a sense of community. And while I'm not a sitter, I wasn't a sitter for any of these images, any of these artworks, I do see myself as a muse for these artists, if only because of those shared lived experiences that connect us spiritually and emotionally. And simultaneously, I felt grief because I'm continually reminded that I don't have autonomy over my own body and mind in ways that other bodies and minds do. And this particular fact is not only situated around gender, but also about race as well. And we've experienced all of the social conditions that lead us to believe such, right? And then further reflecting on the name of the show, as far as it being Tapestry, narrating a new thread, I was reminded of the way that fiber artworks hold a particularly special place within the intersection of art and material culture because of its roots in craft and early stories of Black life in the Americas. Historians note that before access to formal Western artistic traditions was made widely available, fiber was available for manipulation by Black women particularly. And it holds a multi-purpose legacy as a medium associated with beauty and functionality. And so to use tapestry as a descriptor for how you all quote unquote honor the beauty and the power of you all's experiences through art and storytelling and the display of visual images of being a woman in the world, it's in line with the ways that fiber arts, and particularly things like quilts and tapestry, served as an integral part of survival, collecting, organizing, economic advancement, even, and artistic resistance, specifically for Black women. So to follow this emphasis on media, start out with you all, and the ways that certain material functions to tell a story or to empower or to even organize movements, I wanted to ask each of you to share how you identified which medium would tell which story you wanted to share. So you all use so many different modes of aesthetic communication in your work. So like text and painting, photography, meshed together, juxtaposed. So how they're so multi-layered. So using all of these things, what was or is your process when you decide which elements would tell a specific part of the story for you? Because these stories are multi-dimensional.
So my work is very conceptually led, and I have tried to be an artist that starts with a concept and then learns how to make that happen. And with my work being storytelling, I felt the need to not only I wanted to start by having the people tell their own stories. And so that material had to come through video and or audio with some of them. And then starting with their stories, it led to in incorporating different objects. So a big part of this body of work being of women who moved to America, I had asked in the interview process to have them bring at least 3 objects that they brought with them to America. And I was really fascinated with the hierarchy of possessions when someone's life has to be condensed into a weight and a certain size suitcase, and that it speaks a lot about who they are when and what they value, what comes with them and what makes the cut. And so I tried to incorporate all, if not all, then most of those objects in some regard into the elements. And then in listening to their stories, the materials just came out. And so there's grains in a lot of the piece, and those are from their stories, and how that grain in most of the stories represented a resilience and a kind of ingenuity, specifically within the female line. So often something that their mother did in order to help the family economically, and they would be paid in this grain. And then most, and then in trying to include some kind of fiber, especially in one of the pieces. Her culture is Berber, and they communicate through their fibers, and every color is symbolic, and every stitch and design is symbolic. And so I just needed to include some kind of their fibers. And so fortunately she was going back to Algeria, and I was like, sweet, I'll give you money and you can get me a belt. And so I was able to include one of her belts in there, so that you can, because I mean, images just can't capture the richness of the fibers there. And then the reason why I chose oil painting to actually depict the portraits was a reference to the tradition of oil portraiture being reserved for only the most elite, the wealthy, the famous, the people with all the power. And so translating and flipping the power structure into taking these women whose stories and whose image are not often being reflected in the broader narrative, to say, they are worthy, as any, probably more than most people in history have had their pictures painted in oil. And so that's why I've chosen a more traditional format for the actual portraits themselves.
Thank you. So, I mean, my interpretation when I'm engaging in the works, the way you all describe the intersectionality of not only the materials, but the subject matter and how you came to it. I definitely felt that when I walk in the space. When my first engagement with it was online, and even that aspect was interactive. So I really appreciate all the different ways that aesthetic languages were used, because if you aren't familiar with one medium, there's another just waiting for you to tap into. And so I think that's very representative of women and the intersectionality that we have to work through as far as our gender and specifically gender and race intersections as they relate to different marginalizations and oppressions, et cetera. So all of that came through. I'll just let you know that. So I'm gonna ask each person some questions, but it was so interesting because as I was teasing through each work, a lot of you all stuff overlap. And so please feel free if one person is speaking if you feel like you have something to contribute, you can tap in and add to it. And I'll kind of nudge you too, because I'll be like, well, your work did that too. What do you think? All right, Kirsta. So in your artist statement, I'm going right to y'all's words, right? You write, this work is an opportunity to give women the power over their own story and how they would like to be seen and known. So this proclamation for me sends me to the work of Patricia Hill Collins, a feminist, one of the foremost scholars in Black feminism. And she introduced these actionable goals specifically for Black women, which included their right to define themselves, establish positive multiple representations of themselves, and use their cultural heritage as energy to resist daily discrimination, and also confront interlocking structures of domination like race, gender, class oppression. So from this frame, I see your work as an emergent articulation of this. Specifically, I don't know if you heard of the text, This Bridge Called My Back, but it's third world feminism. It's a collective of narratives around just the experiences of women around the world, right? So it explores these complex intersections that deal with not only an American lens, but an international lens, which should not be conflated. Like there are different experiences globally. So how does capturing you in your body, I'm not sure what your ethnicity is, but you read white. Phenotypically you read you read white, but how was it for you in your body capturing these women, specifically those that you say are underrepresented and marginalized and have not been at the fore of representation? How did you feel personally, and how did you reconcile your position as being the person who is placing those narratives on display, right? And you use a lot of material and a lot of their own things, but I just want to hear from you how you navigated that space between self and working with this specific demographic and population of women.
Yeah, so I love this question because it allows me to discuss the intentionality that comes into my work, and in acknowledging my heritage in being white and my white privilege and my white gaze. And so coming from that knowledge, the intentionality has come from making the work as a relationship and a collaboration, instead of, I am not the expert, they are the expert. They are the expert on themselves. They're the expert on their culture and their faith and how they want to be represented. And so I saw my job more as a really good listener and an explorer of them, and as a way to spend my white privilege on their stories instead of my own. There's enough of my narrative out there. There's enough of, my position and my culture represented. And so I would rather participate in another form of representation. And you had talked about the I forget exactly your wording, but it made me think about the value not only in representation, but in dimensionality. And so giving, not just one picture, but a story, objects, all these and videos, all these elements so that there is dimensionality, and that most of the images given to, if there are given to these women, would often be one dimensional. And so giving them the right to have multidimensional complexities of, hopes and dreams and desires and disappointments, and giving them the room to do that and the value to being able to express that. And so a lot of the intentionality also comes into, from the very beginning, in being not giving away a lot of my power as an artist. And so each subject has the right to, I ask permission before using images, before using items, especially religious items, because I'm not of the religion. And there's been many times where my great artistic idea ended up being very offensive religiously. And so, establishing that trust as a collaborator and giving them the authority in my work to say, this is representing you, you're the authority. And they were able to say, actually, that idea doesn't quite work for me or my faith, and then being like, great, then it's my job to figure out a way to represent you the way you want to. And they all have power over their images, the items that are used. They have veto power even to the end with everything. And then also trying to step back in that my ideas are not, the forefront of the pieces of the value, of the product.
I would probably add, as she is speaking, you talked about like the dimensionality of the women and like speaking to their like hopes and dreams. And that just kind of made me think, even like with your work, you talk about like what they had to bring and what they had to leave behind. And it makes me think, tying back to your question about like survival and resistance, that so much of what we leave behind sometimes are our dreams. And I feel like art kind of allows people to get in touch with them again, to connect with their dreams in a way that's not so short-sighted. I feel like when you're surviving, you don't really have time to think about anything beyond like the next moment, the next minute, the next day. But I feel like art invites people into that process of being able to dream and think more broadly about what their lives can become.
It's wonderful. Similar to that, piggybacking off of that, another really key intentionality from my approach is the questions that I ask to solicit their stories are strengths-based and not deficit-based. And so I want them to feel really proud of what they share, and that they don't need to elicit any specific feeling from anyone. They don't have to share. They don't have to be known by the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to them. They can be known by their hopes and dreams, and giving the opportunity to let that be displayed and be a key element of them, instead of just, I'm a refugee and I was born, in the middle of war. And sure, that's a part of who they are, but that's not all of them. So being intentional about not trying to solicit, more deficit framing in that way.
And looking at those videos that accompany them online, it was really nice to see the questions. They were so simple, from like knowing their favorite color to just what's most important to them. It just ran the gamut. So I really appreciated just the simplicity of just being, without having to think about that resistance all the time. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask, all of you can address this question, but it was a follow-up to your work about thinking about your work as an interventionist piece, like an activist piece. to support the voices of the people, the participants who you are using as muses, right? So do you see your work acting in interventionist ways that disrupt narratives? Or do you just see it as something that, like, what do you hope the audience, do you have hopes for the audience to be moved in certain ways when it comes to your work being an intervention for certain narratives about the people who are highlighted in the works?
Yes, and a reason why I feel at home with these artists is because of that dynamic that I feel in their art. It's a lot of artists don't use art as activism, and so it's fun to find a home with others that do. There's such a power in art, and I realized early on, specifically the power of portraiture, and realizing that it's a great merging of something I love doing and I'm interested in people, and yet I can also use it as a tool for power, to disrupt narratives, to introduce different perspectives. And it can be confrontational. And I think in some ways the work might be for some people, but I use it more as an invitation, that it's invitational and to step into. And I also see it as a way of lessening the emotional taxation of the people whose stories are being told, that I can do the legwork, that they can share their story, and then I can amplify it so that they don't have to use so much emotional energy to get their own story out there. And so I hope to be just that tool that can be that, and to enter into spaces that they might not be invited into. And so that also is part of using my own privilege, that I might be invited into spaces they're not. And then it's like, well, surprise, I'm bringing it in. I'm opening these doors for them. So having work that is interactive, and installation work is inherently interactive, and that, it doesn't exist until it's installed. And this work, it's one of those, it's a risk putting it out there, but it also, the work doesn't completely exist until it's interacted with. And I love how little control I have. That's one of the reasons why I love interactive artwork. I also have been most changed by interactive artwork, and so I strive for that. I actually love edible art. It's like one of my favorites, and I was trying to really figure out a way to make edible art in this. And so installing, every time that I've installed the work, there's always this question of, how will it be engaged with? And especially having, like, I've tried to explore, because I have different elements and video and all this stuff. I've tried to explore kind of how to invite and encourage people to engage beyond just what they're looking at. And I'm going to have to continue to do that. I've learned from the other artists of, like, some different modes of inviting people into that engagement. And I'll continue to grow with that. But yeah, it to me, the installation is the exciting part, and everything starts from there. And that's when I start to actually see the work come alive and be out of my hands.
I just want to say thank you for, like, this exhibition was a nice puzzle that I feel like fit together. I can, from the panel, your responses, I can see you all learn from each other, which is the greatest gift that an artist can have in an experience, is to be able to learn from other creatives, and I learned a lot from you all. So thank you for allowing me to experience and ask you questions and facilitate a dialogue.